Our next speaker is the Senior R&D Manager at NEO. His background includes being a Java software engineer, distributed software development manager, and R&D manager for companies such as Accenture and WebPower. He got a double master's degree in international industrial engineering and management and computer science and engineering. He's an expert of managing distributed teams, algorithm development, simulation and modeling, and economic modeling. So please help me welcome to the stage, Malcolm Lerider.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here, and once again, welcome to everyone in joining the first ever NEO DevCon. It's really amazing to see how many people turn up here. We also had a European tour a few weeks ago, and to see the community traction that we are getting, it's quite incredible. I will talk a bit today about decentralization and governance, which is quite a hot topic amongst our own community. And I will start by explaining a bit about the consensus algorithm that is used in NEO, because that's actually the reason why we are taking the approach we are taking towards our decentralization process. So, well, very short introduction about myself. As mentioned, I work as Senior R&D Manager at NEO. So if you have any questions, you want to talk with me about anything and all, just shoot me an email at malcolm@neo.org. I will answer everything except emails about when NEO is mooning. So let's just start off with proof of work and proof of stake. How many in here know what proof of work and proof of stake is? That's almost everyone. I'll actually save some time here by not explaining how this works and go directly into why I personally believe that the approach to proof of work and proof of stake is actually not fulfilling the business demands, and that's a big obstacle for actually adoption of blockchain technology among well-traditional enterprises. So what you have in both proof of work and proof of stake is, well, proof of work is first of all a very robust and secure system, and proof of stake is a way to try to achieve the same thing but saving the computational power, saving the energy resources. But the problem with both systems is that you end up with a blockchain that can have several candidates for the next block. So you end up with the picture like the blue chain here, where it can branch off. And let's see with raise of hands again, how many of you have transferred a token to another wallet, one wallet to another, or one exchange to another exchange? Also almost everyone in here. So then you know that you have to wait for a certain number of confirmations, right? So it can be 15 confirmation, it can be 30 confirmation. And the reason why you have to wait is actually because of the picture here. It can branch off, so you need to wait to make sure that you actually have a 99.999% chance on being on the longest chain, so that your transaction is actually part of the longest chain. So if you have a block time of 20 seconds and you need to wait for 30 confirmation, what you end up with is actually a transaction time of 600 seconds, 10 minutes, when the block time itself is actually just 20 seconds. So how is this related to NEO then, and our approach to decentralization? Well, the consensus mechanism in NEO is very different. It's called the delegated Byzantine fault tolerance and is invented by Eric, who had the beautiful explanation about the NEO VM and the NEO technology earlier. So how it works is that there are a number of fewer nodes that participate in the consensus mechanism, and these are called consensus nodes. And it works like one of the consensus nodes will be selected as the speaker. He will propose the next block in the blockchain. The other consensus node will follow the Byzantine problem to actually come to a conclusion whether or not that block can be accepted or not. And they will send a response. They can send a response that they can confirm that it is the correct block, or they can send a response that they want to change the view. And that means that they cannot confirm that it is the correct block, and what will happen in that case is that that block will be rejected, and one of the other consensus nodes will be selected to propose his version. And this will iterate until consensus on the block is found. And then they will, of course, sign on the block, all the consensus nodes. So what you end up with in NEO is not the system with branching. You end up with just a plain simple chain. from start to finish. And after every single block, all the transactions are already 100% finalized. So in comparing with the proof of work and proof of stake, where you go towards 100%, you get 99.9999. In NEO, you actually do have 100% finality after each single block. So if the block time is 15 seconds, then the transaction time is 15 seconds. If you send from one wallet to another, it takes 15 seconds. And I mean, this is quite important from my perspective also when you imagine the use cases and what you want to use blockchain for. If you have high volume transaction and you also have high value transaction, and you first of all, you need to wait for 10 minutes or even longer than that before it can be confirmed, or even that you are a financial institution and you don't even want to accept the risk of 99.999% certainty. In NEO, you actually do have 100% finality after every single block. And then, of course, is NEO just the perfect consensus algorithm and the one that everybody should just use? And since I'm completely unbiased, I can say, of course it is. Well, jokes aside, there's, of course, always trade-offs. And that's when we get into the decentralization and our approach to consensus nodes and decentralizing slower than what the community expects us to do. So, first of all, it's good to keep in mind that Bitcoin and Ethereum are not as decentralized as some people may believe. The top 3, 4 mining pools are actually controlling more than 50% of the hashing power. So it's not as decentralized as some would like to make it. And they're also control completely the complete blockchain by not more than 20 entities. So if you would have a NEO system with just 20 consensus nodes, that would already be more decentralized than both Bitcoin and Ethereum. So the trade-off with NEO is that it's more sensitive towards fault tolerance. So this is a typo here. It should not say fault rate. It's actually fault tolerance. So for example, if we have here, we have 22 nodes, then you can use the algorithm on top there, the n minus 1 divided by 3. If we have 22 nodes, then n is the total number of consensus nodes, minus 1, which is 21, divided by 3, which is 7. So a NEO system with 22 consensus nodes can handle 7 nodes going down and still be able to produce block. If the 8th node also goes down, the blockchain is still secure. There's nothing wrong with the blockchain. The only thing that will happen is that it will stop to produce new blocks until one of the nodes are restored again. So it's easy to make the connection here why we taking the approach of decentralizing slower, because not only can these consensus node goes down, but you can also be in the situation where people are running consensus nodes and they on purpose get bored on running a consensus node, or they do not get the benefit from running a consensus node that they expected, so they just shut it down. So if we have, for example, 22 consensus nodes and 5 of them decide that they do not want to run the consensus anymore, they just shut it down, then we're just left with a fault tolerance of 2 nodes, which is obviously not for the blockchain, good for the blockchain as a whole. So what we need in a system like this is actually consensus nodes that are committed to upholding the stability of the network and running the consensus nodes for a long period of time. And that's why the NEO Council has the approach that we have now, that we are actually on purpose selecting people to join in on the initial decentralization of the NEO blockchain. And it's a sort of a bootstrapping. So the initial nodes will be filtered and sort of selected by the NEO Council. In the end, the consensus node will be voted in by all the NEO holders. And the initial filtering will be done by actually looking at market leaders that have high uptime already. They have a track record of high uptime and server management. They have their own engineers to actually maintain and upgrade the nodes, because when we decentralize our node, we will not only host it at a third party, but they will actually own the node. They will have their own engineers to maintain the node. They will own the private key to the node, so they will have the full control of the consensus node. And we, of course, since we want them to run the node for a longer period of time, to not shut it down on purpose, we want them to have a commitment to NEO, so that they are actually interested in the NEO ecosystem more than just hosting the node itself. It should not only be economic incentive in its own native token. And we already have a few parties, and we want to have even more consensus nodes joining in first on the testnet to prove themselves. And we are looking for market leaders in industries that are not represented yet, and also in new geographic areas. And that's because we want to achieve not only decentralization from a technical perspective. I mean, Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're all decentralized just from a technical perspective. But we also want to have them decentralized from an interest perspective. I like to call it decentralized interests. So not only because they want to earn money, but they have vested interest in, they're doing consultancy on Neo blockchain. They are doing investment in Neo projects. These kind of things, so that they are not run by all the same incentives. And the initial Bootstrap, the current state on the consensus node that we have already revealed so far is that Neo nodes will have 5 consensus nodes. The City of Zion will be running 3 consensus nodes. KPN will be running 1 node. And Finality Capital will be running 1 node. And we are in discussion with more corporate nodes. It's possible that there are even more corporate nodes joining in the initial Bootstrap. But even now, in the current state we will actually achieve the goal we set up back in October last year. That in Q1 in 2018, the Neo Council should be running less than 2/3 of all the consensus node. So the Neo Council do not have own majority to control the network. And the community is very interested in knowing what's the current status, and this is actually what we are having right now. So right now, if you're using the testnet to try out your application, your testnet is actually being run now by Neo Council, of course, but City of Zion are already voted in on the testnet, so they are running the 3 nodes already there. KPN is also already running on the testnet with their own node, with their own engineer managing it. And we are in the progress of improving the peer-to-peer network. We are working on improving the voting algorithm. And of course, also adding more consensus node to the testnet. So Finality Capital will also be preparing their node to be voting into the testnet as well. So we will require all the possible consensus node to run on the testnet for a couple of weeks to prove that they can actually maintain the node, they can upgrade it, they can restore it whenever possible or whenever needed, so that they have a good foundation, a good knowledge of running a consensus node before it gets considered to be voted in on the mainnet. And we are also working on a candidate list, as Daunfei mentioned earlier, so that the community can see which candidates there are, because the voting will be open for everyone. So everybody who holds the Neo token can vote on the consensus nodes. And the voting is already implemented in Neo, so you can already do that, but it's not implemented in the GUI. So that's also something that we are working on now, to implement a simpler version for users to use a wallet to be able to vote directly for the consensus nodes. And I think our way of implementing this kind of dividing between the Neo token and gas token and having a limited number of consensus nodes is a quite good protection from conflict of interest. When you have this large decentralized system with thousands and tens of thousands of people participating in the consensus itself, what you tend to end up with is thousands of people with different opinions about how the network should develop, what changes to implement. And by limiting that number, you get fewer number of nodes that actually need to agree on what to upgrade in a network. So it's a little bit like a representative democracy. So the Neo holders will vote in consensus nodes, and the consensus node will come to an agreement to upgrade according to the code changes that the developers has done. And a problem with there are other projects which are also implementing similar delegated proof of stake or other voting systems. But the problem that they have is that they all allow the nodes to have an anonymous identity, and that is always open to Sybil attacks because you don't know who the actual owner behind the stake is. You don't know who the owner of the nodes who are participating in the consensus are. So in NEO, we actually will require all the nominees and the consensus nodes to have a public identity. So if someone would be interested in running more than one consensus node in order to get more influence over the network, they would have to register more nominees with a public identity. So it would be open to everybody to see what kind of intentions the nominees have. If someone would register a lot of nominees, it's open and everybody can see that perhaps they will gain too much influence if we vote in all of them. So all the NEO holders can decide to vote on other consensus nodes instead. And that's a very brief discussion, and I actually wanted to go through it as fast as possible to leave room for at least one or two questions, since this is a quite hot topic amongst the community. So perhaps we can do a raise of hands if anybody has any questions. Yeah, we have one over here. How do you run your own node? So what you can do if you're actually running a full node, if you just download the wallet and the NEO GUI, you can just download that one or the NEO CLI and let it sync all the blocks, and then you will be running a full node. If you want to be voted in, so you want to become an actual consensus node, then I suggest you would actually just reach out to the NEO Council and tell us that you have that interest, tell us which company you represent, and tell us what interest you have in the NEO ecosystem as a whole. Yes, question here.
Yeah, so what is the incentive for people to run the node if currently there's a minimum of close to zero gas fees can obtained by maintaining the node?
Right. So the question is, what kind of incentive is there to run a consensus node? And the system is actually built up so that there should not be an economic incentive to run the node itself. Because what we have seen in other blockchains are that there is a conflict of interest between the users of the blockchain and the ones creating the blocks. For example, in Bitcoin, you may have those miners who want to have a limit block size, because if there are a limit amount of transaction in every block, then they can collect more transaction fees. So the NEO system is built up with a separate of NEO token and gas token to divide this conflict of interest. So there is no direct economic benefit of running the consensus node. So the people who would be interested in running the node itself could be, for example, if you hold a lot of NEO tokens yourself, that all the gas is recycled and redistributed to the NEO holders. So if you want to ensure that you are getting all these redistribution, you would have an interest in running a node if you just by holding a lot of NEO. Other than that, if you have a project, a large application running and using the NEO blockchain, you would obviously have an incentive to make sure that the network is upheld and secure. If you're doing IT consultancy, you're doing smart contract consultancy for companies, you will also have an incentive to run a node. If you are a company who wants to, NEO nodes can actually be set up as an internal, a private node also. You can, so if there are consultant firms that set up private NEO networks for clients, then they may want to run a public NEO node as well, just to gain the know-how, the knowledge on how to run and maintain a node. It's quite a good way of getting introduced to the NEO technology. So that's the kind of persons who would be interested in running the consensus nodes. And yeah, that's about the time I had for today, so thank every one of you.